Okay, tonight as we begin, I might tell you we're going to have a little bit of glasses problem again, and for the sake of the people on tape that'll be listening to this maybe 10 years down the line, they wonder what in the world I'm doing. I might tell them that I had my 2 cataracts removed, and so my eyesight has gotten so good that it's caused tremendous problems. And the problem is that I've had to throw away my glasses because I have 20/20 sight looking far away, and but I do need glasses to read. However, I can read without glasses. It's kind of like this, but I will need them to read. And the problem is that since I don't wear them now, except when I sit down to read, I forgot to bring them tonight. So we're going to see just how much we can read in here. Well, you'll need yours to read with, won't you? Well, let me, here, I'll get her. She's got a set right here. She knows everything anyway, so she doesn't have to. Yeah, she's told me that before.
Steve knows it all too. So.
Yeah, Steve knows it. Let me see which one I can see the best with. Oh, you got those. Bifocals. Hey, these are great.
I'll sell them to you.
I look better with Helen's, don't I? Yeah, you can. Well, at any rate, what you get tonight's a good reader and a good look too, so put them both. Well, she doesn't keep her glasses very clean. Okay, now we get down to the serious stuff where we get started here then tonight on the book of James. So we're going to be studying now in chapter 1, in a section, chapter verses 12 through 18. Now, when we get down to this is going to tell us how to view your trials and tribulations. Remember, so far we've been talking about trials and tribulations. And that is to count it all joy, and if you need wisdom, pray for wisdom. And then we talked about one of the great problems and tribulations that we have in this world is the money that we've got, either having not enough or having too much money, and how we're to view that particular thing. And so now then, tonight here, he's going to tell us, now here's how you view your trials and your tribulations. So many times we get them all mixed up. So here now we start out, and it says, "Blessed is the man that endureth temptation, for when he hath been approved, he shall receive the crown of life, which the Lord promised to them that love him." So now, we're starting out here. Blessed is he then that endureth temptations. Now, the first thing that we're going to have to see here is that temptations are something to endure. Now, in just a moment, I'm going to talk about the word temptations. But for right now, what he's talking about in these temptations, they're the trials and troubles that come upon you. And he's talking about these trials and these troubles that come upon you, and there is something that you have to endure. Now, before this, what was it that he said that you're to do when these manifold trials and troubles come upon you? What did he say? Count it all joy, my brethren. And now then, he's down here, and he says, then in here, that blessed is the man that endureth temptations. So temptation is something that you're going to have to endure, these trials. Now, we'll not go over this again because we talked about it at great length, and that is that the joy that we have is not just fun. The trials and temptations that we have to go through are things that have to be endured. And the greatest example in the whole world is in Hebrews the chapter 12 and verse 2. And there's talking about Jesus on the cross. And there it said, "But for the joy that was set before him, he endured the cross." And it tells there about the things he endured, all of the ugly things that are said about him. So Jesus had to go through that, endure that, to be able to hold up under that. because of the joys that he has. Now, as we look in here then, he goes ahead and he says, now, this is going to be something that that you're blessed with. That means, the word blessed there means inner peace. It means contentment. That's what you will find, is contentment. In the Sermon on the Mount, blessed is he that, and then it goes through several things. The word blessed means that you find an inner contentment when you go through these things. So if you endure your tribulations, your trials, all the problems of life, you are going to find an inner contentment, because you're going to understand that you are putting your confidence in God. You have gone through this thing. You've upheld. You've been faithful to Him. And the Apostle Paul says, you'll not be put to shame then. And he said, that was what will give you hope, that you will have the hope of having that strength to be able to go on to deal with life. Now, here is where the interesting things come. And that is that up here in verse 12, we have the word temptation. Then in verse 13, we have the word tempt again, which is the same word. Now, let no man say when he is tempted, I am tempted of God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempteth no man. Now, here we have something here that is kind of interesting that we want to take a look at. And that is where we have these trials and temptations in here. This word, temptations, is used to describe both inward temptations to do wrong and outward testing to determine how strong you really are. Hence, it is translated as temptations, and sometimes it's translated as testing or proving. So now, the word can be used in both ways, because it really has both of these meanings. Now, one of them is good and one of them is bad. Now, up here in verse 12, blessed is the man that endureth temptations. Now, that's the outward temptations that we have. Those are the outward problems. Those are the trials and tribulations that come upon you, the great losses that come in your life. That's what he's talking about in there. But now then, when you move down here to verse 13, why, then he talks about when you're tempted, don't ever get the idea that you're tempted of God. Now, this is talking about something that is a little bit different. So let's look right here, as we're looking here at temptations. I've got down here that false teachers' doctrines was tested. In Revelation chapter 2, verse 2, Paul there is talking about to the Ephesians, and he said, when these false teachers came in, you put them to the test. You proved them. And you put them to the test to see whether they could pass the test or not. Now, this is the word that he uses, where you are tested to see whether you can pass the test. Now, God tried or tempted, we might say, some translators put it this way, Abraham. In Hebrews chapter 11, verse 17, I don't know what your version will say. Some say God tempted him. Others say God tested him. Others will say God proved him, because that word can mean all of those things. And we want to see how it can mean those things that are in there. Rod, what does yours say? Tested? Anybody got proved or tempted? Okay, some of the older translations will put in tempted. Now, what it is that God, when he tried or he tested Abraham, remember when he took him up on the mountain and he had him to offer his son? What was he doing with Abraham? Was he tempting Abraham to commit a sin? Was he trying to get Abraham to sin? Or was he testing Abraham to see how strong Abraham was? And when Abraham passed the test, then God sent the angel, he stopped him, and he says, now I know. So Abraham passed that test. Now, again, we've got down here in this verse, James 1:13, it says, God does not tempt anyone. Okay? God doesn't tempt anyone. But in Hebrews, God tempted or tested Abraham. The words mean both things. Just like in English, we have many words that have two meanings to it. Now, I've got an example down there, like parents with children. What do you do when your children get up, 6, 7, 8 years old, and you tell them not to do something? Okay? And you keep telling them, now, don't you do something. I don't want you to go outside the gate. You stay inside the fence. 6 years old. Now make sure you stay inside the fence. I don't want you out there in that traffic. You stay inside the fence. What does any good parent do? Do you just tell your child, stay inside the fence, and then go on about your way and come back and check on them in a couple of hours? But you'll tell them that, won't you? Then come in and take a peek through the window. Watch. What are you doing? Now let me ask you, are you tempting them to go out and play in the middle of the street? Is that what you're trying to do? You're trying to get them to go out and play in the middle of the street? Or are you testing them to see if they're strong enough not to go play in the middle of the street? See? Let's suppose that some money has been missing, just some change and stuff, and you've noticed quarters missing somewhere around your house. Would it be proper for you to, as you look and you say, well, I don't know. I don't know whether Johnny's been taking this money or not. Would it be proper for you to leave some money out? Leave it out there where it can be seen, but keep your eyes on it. See? Keep your eyes on it. And if Johnny comes and he takes the quarter that you left out, are you the one, did you put that out there to cause him to sin? See? Was that your purpose? No, your purpose was to put him to the test. See? That's why they are so closely related one to the other, the testing and the tempting to sin. So now, will you ever be put in a situation where you are tempted not to take a quarter, but where you're tempted to sin? Maybe you wouldn't steal a quarter, but would you steal $1,000? Well, you say, I hope not. Yeah, I hope not. But will you ever be put in a situation in life to where you could make $1,000 if you lied, if you did something improper? And now then, you're there. It's there. You may have found $1,000 and you know who it belongs to, but he doesn't know you have it, so you could keep it. And now then you're guilty of stealing. And so you find yourself in these things all the time, don't you? See? In these situations where you would say, boy, this is something that I'd like to have. Are there ever any sexual temptations that go on in life that people go through? Or are we just born and we live and die and there never any sexual temptations come our way? See? Now, when people sin and it causes them lots of trouble, what's the first thing they will do when they're caught? The first thing is deny it, isn't it? Well, I didn't do it. No, I know you did it. See, I have the evidence because I had a camera on you. Here's the camera, and it shows that you took my $100 bill. Now, he's caught red-handed. What will he say? Well, some people will say, yeah, I did. But I'm talking about what's the normal thing? What's the people that not trying to serve God? What are they going to say? Well, I thought that, I thought maybe I'd put that down there. And they're going to try to make some excuses, aren't they? And then maybe they might get mad at you and accuse you of tempting them. It's your fault. You shouldn't have put it down there. Or if it's in the realm of somewhere out of that realm, they could blame God. So many people blame God for doing these things. What is the normal thing that people do when somebody gets deathly sick or when somebody dies? What is a normal situation for people to do? You're going to ask why, right? Why did God do this? Why did God do this? You don't have anybody else to blame. Now, the vast majority of people do that. That's one of the major things that you have to work with when you're working with somebody who's lost a loved one, when a loved one's died. And if they come to you to talk to you to try to get help, just kind of expect them to talk about, I'm so angry with God. Why did God do this? Now, what James is saying is, now, when any man is tempted, now these are your temptations to sin. You're going to commit sin. Now, when any man is tempted in here, do not let him say, I am tempted of God. He said, because God cannot be tempted, and God does not tempt anybody else. See? So this is the point that he's going to make. Now he's going to show us how we are tempted. Here's how you are tempted to sin. When you commit any sin, I don't care what it is, when you tell a lie, if you steal something, if the clerk gives you $5 extra at the store and you keep it, if there's a sexual temptation, whatever it is, doesn't make any difference what it is, he now is getting ready to tell us, here's how that thing always takes place. Here is what really happens in this thing. It says, when you're tempted in here, he said, God cannot be tempted, and he himself tempteth no man, but each man is tempted when he is drawn away by his own lust. So it's not God's fault. God doesn't entice you to sin, but you're drawn away by your own lust. Now, this drawn away is it's really a term that can be used like a hunter uses it. If he goes out deer hunting, and out here's a clump of woods, and let's suppose he sees a big buck run in that clump of woods. And it's a clearing here, it's a clearing all the way around, but out there is 5 acres, just real wooded area. And you know that there's a big buck in there. Can you take your gun and just charge in there through the brush and go in and shoot that buck? No way on this earth. Because he's going to hear you coming, and he's going to be out the other side before you ever get there. You could hunt the rest of your life trying to kill a buck that way, and you're not going to be able to get him. But you've got to draw him out. You've got to draw him out. Now, there are different ways that you can draw him out. You might get out there and you just might sit really still for 2 or 3 hours and expect him to come across that path again. You are setting him up. You're getting ready to kill him, but you're setting him up so that he doesn't know about this danger. Or you could, I took Helen with me, I could send her around on the other side of the woods. And I could say, honey, go around the other side of the woods and then just walk through that woods. Well, what would she do when she started walking through that woods? She'd be scaring that deer right over to me, wouldn't she? And he'd jump out. He's drawn out, and I can kill him. I can't get him until he's drawn out. But there has to be some deceiving in there somehow. We have to work on his fear. He's going to run from noise and movement and so forth. So that deer has a fear. That deer has a weakness. And we're going to work on that weakness of that deer. See? Now, every one of us has a weakness. Our weakness is not fear, but our weakness is lust. That we're drawn away by our own lust. We know we shouldn't do this, but it's our lust that makes us do it. Now, what is the definition of lust? strong desire. That really is all it means. It means strong desire, not just desire, but it means strong desire. This is a word for if a man looketh on a woman to lust after her. Now, when you think about lust, do you think about something that's good or bad? See, here you're drawn away by your own lust. We think about it as being bad, don't we? But let's talk about that for just a moment, because lust is really good. It's really good. Now you say, well, what do you mean that it's good? Well, first of all, who made us and made human beings so they have these desires? God. He made us so we have these desires, so we can be pleased and we can be comforted. Whether it's whatever it is that are out there, we've got these desires. I'd like to have this, I'd like to have that. Now let's suppose that man has no desires. That's something we don't have any desire. How many people would get up in the morning and fight the traffic to go to work? Why do people go to work? It's because of their lust. And you say, what do you mean? It's because they desire the reward of that work, isn't it? They desire the money. They have a strong desire for that money. Now, is that good or bad? To say all these people are fighting that traffic because every one of them has lust. That's good. If they didn't have that strong desire, nobody's going to go out there and fight that traffic. And if they don't fight that traffic, they're not going to be able to take care of their family. And their kids are all going to starve. And so forth. Now, here's another thing. Paul said in Timothy, he said, if any man desireth the office of a bishop or an elder, that word is lust. If any man lusteth after the office of a bishop. So we should lust. We should have a strong desire to live our life in such a way that we can qualify to serve as an elder. Is that lust good or is that lust bad? Paul said one time when he was in prison, he didn't know whether he was going to live or die, and he said, I think I'm going to live, but I'm not sure. He said, however, I have a desire to die and go be with Christ. That word is lust. I have a strong desire to go be with Christ. Now, is that lust good or is that lust bad? Let's suppose that you didn't have any desire to go to be with Christ. We're going to take all of the desire out of you. And so there's no desire to go to heaven, no desire to go to Christ. If you go, fine. If you don't go, fine. There's no desire to go. How many people are going to go to heaven? See? Now, lust is good, but why do we think of it as being bad? There's one reason. We've got this lust, and it's good, but how do we use this good thing? How do we humans, let's take the whole human race, how do we humans use our lust, this strong desire, 99.9% of the time? We use it a bad way, don't we? We lust after, and we misuse it after the wrong things. I'm lusting after money, just like this guy that's going to work, and he's making money in an honorable way to take care of his family. I see $50 drop out of Jack's pocket. I pick it up, put it in there. Anybody in here that don't want the money that's in your billfold? If you do, I'll get rid of it right now. I'll just come down and we'll get it. Do you have a desire to have that money that's in and to keep that money that's in there? Well, okay, it drops out. Hey, yeah. So I'm going to put it in here. It's a lust. It's a desire to do that. Now, what do we do? How do humans use it? Do humans say, whoa, yeah, I would like to have that. You bet I'd like to have that. But Christ says no. And so I'm out of here. Here, Jack, here's your $50 back. See? And so if you can get what you really want and you don't think you're going to get caught, that's when you get in trouble, isn't it? See? Okay, lust then is really something that's good, but it's something we misuse, and so we generally think of it as being bad. But now, when we sin, he said, here's what happens. Every man, when he sins, is drawn away by his own lust. Now, so I've got there, James describes it in a very interesting way there. Then he says, and enticed. Now, that is a fisherman's term. That word means baited. So now if you take a fisherman, and a fisherman goes out, gets in a boat, goes out in the lake, what are the chances of him catching a fish if he just does it in an honorable way? What's the chances of going out there and looking for a fish, bing, and picking one up? See? No. What do fishermen do? All fishermen are hypocrites. Now, we got two of the greatest fishermen I know of in the country, and both of them are hypocrites. We got there, Dave and Jim. They go out, they can catch fish anywhere. See, they can catch fish. But do you know how they do it? See? What they do is they fool the fish. See? They take the line, they put a hook on it, then they put a worm on that hook, and then they get down there, that fish looks up, sees that worm wiggling. What does that fish think? Dinner, see? And it bites it, and up there sits the old hypocrites. And what do? Boom, and in comes the fish, see? Now, these guys are skilled. They know that there are some fish that'll bite for a worm. Some fish you could fish all day and put a worm on there, and they would not touch it. And so you've got to put a fish egg on. Or you've got to go down and buy a plug of some kind. They know the kind of bait to use. And by the way, what kind of bait do you use? What is it those guys know about fish that I don't know? If I'm going to go fishing tomorrow, what kind of bait do you use if you're going to fish in the river? See? What? That's what it is. You've got to know your fish. You've got to know how they lust. What do the fish lust for? See? This fish lusts for this. This fish lusts for this. So you give them what they lust for. So when you put that bait out there that fish really desires, bang, you're going to catch the fish. Now, that's what happens in sin. See? Some of us don't have a strong desire to eat fishing worms, do we? See? But we might have a strong desire for money. Now, if we have a strong desire for money, I've got this intense drive for money. I don't have this drive to go to heaven, see, but I've got this intense drive for money. What do you suppose Satan is going to use when he wants to get me to sin? See? That's what he's going to use. Oliver over here has this intense power, this drive for power. He has all the money he wants, but he loves power. He wants power. What do you suppose is going to happen to Oliver? Somewhere along the line, he's going to be given and tempted with get that power by lying, stealing, cheating, something of this nature. Another person has strong sexual desires. Guess what Satan's going to use? See? So now, James paints the picture for us in this way. That's why we sin. That's why we sin. By the way, what's this book all about? What is it that we keep talking about? This book is the book of Practical Christianity, the book of common sense. What is he telling us? He's telling us, here's what you watch for in your everyday life. See, we're not talking about doctrine of some kind, but here's what you watch for in everyday life. You think of yourself as an animal out in the field or as a fish in the lake. You can't be caught. That fish can't be caught unless somebody comes along that knows why that fish lusts, and then they bait him and they pull that fish out. That's the same way with you and me. What are our strong desires? Or is it, do we have a strong desire to go to heaven, to be with Christ, is that my overriding desire? Will that override this other thing? See? Will that override this other thing? See? That's what we're shooting for, because we have that lust then that's there. But it's a very graphic way of putting it in there. Now it says, when lust hath conceived, it beareth forth sin. This again is an example or an analogy. When lust hath conceived. Now then, it's looking, he's personifying lust. He's using lust as a woman. That here it is, that you're out here, and you see this woman, and you're going to take that woman, and she's going to conceive. Now, two humans, you bear a child, another human. But here it is, I have this lust, and I see this, whatever it is, whether it's money, whatever it is, I see this, and I lust after. I have this strong desire for it. Now, if I have that strong desire, is that sin? Not yet. Not yet. See? It's just like that fish that's down there that has a strong desire for a fishing worm. Nothing wrong with that yet. He looks up and he sees that fishing worm wiggling. And he sees that. Wow, dinner! Has he sinned? Yet. But he's on the verge, isn't he? When does the fish get caught? When he bites. See? When do you sin? When you fulfill your lust. When you go ahead and you fulfill that lust, whatever it is. Jack loses $50, I pick it up. Wow, I'd like to have that $50. If he lost a little clip right in there with $500 in it, would it be a bigger temptation to me? Would my lust be a little bit stronger? Yeah, I'd really like to have that. Anything wrong with me liking to have $500? No. But now, when do I sin? Man, I'd like to have that. Boy, that'd be good. Hey, Jack, here, you just lost this. I didn't sin. Man, I'd like to have that. What just happened? I sinned. See? That's when I sin. But when my desire meets that lust, they come together, then the offspring is sin. Now that I've sinned, all right, here's the interesting thing. Now sin, which is the child of lust, will soon become full grown. It says, and this sin, when it is full grown, bringeth forth death. All right, now there is sin that doesn't bring forth death. Now this is kind of hair splitting, and it's interesting. But when I commit this sin, I put that wad of $500 in my pocket. I've sinned. Now, I turn around, and my conscience really bothers me. Man, I shouldn't have done that. That's not mine. Here, Jack, here's $500. I didn't let the sin grow. I killed that sin right there at the beginning. But suppose I let the sin grow, and the sin becomes full grown. What does it mean, sin becomes full grown? I don't repent of it. I go ahead and I keep the money. And now I'm a thief. And hiding this money, that's going to bring eternal damnation to me. Now, if my conscience is tender enough, reach in there and pick it out and throw it back to Jack, yeah, then I haven't died yet, you see, there. But if I don't repent of my sin, there, I'm going to be spiritually dead. That's the whole point that he's making. So now, he explains to us, this is how you sin. See, this is how you sin. Don't ever blame God when you sin in this way. See, in here. It's always the devil that's going to do it, and look at it, and each one of us is responsible for it. It happens by our own lust and not by God. See? Now, Full grown means fully formed, and death is separated or spiritual death there. Okay, now then the next statement that he makes is this. These verses assure us that God is unchangeable, immutable, permanent, totally dependable, and the only change in this life is with man. So now, what he's trying to do is embed within our mind, don't blame God for anything that is wrong. This is the idea. Don't blame Him. There's one thing you can always depend on. It's the only thing I know that you can always depend on. You can always depend on God being unchangeable. See? Always depend on that. Now that's what these verses are going to be. So now, he starts out here in verse 17, and he says this. He says, now every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there can be no variation, neither shadow that is cast by turning. All right, as you see, I've got down here, and this is something kind of interesting that in the Greek it comes out in here. When it says in here, every good gift, if you look at your footnote, your footnote probably tell you down there that that's kind of a different thing that is saying in there. Yeah, mine says it's the giving. What that actually says is, every act of giving that God gives, every act of giving that comes from God. Now, no temptation comes from God. See, no temptation comes from God. Every act of giving. So every act of giving is good, and every perfect gift is from above. So the first statement says, whenever God gives, however He gives it, it's good. He gives it in a good way, and everything He gives is also good. In other words, it's totally good with God. Now then, he goes ahead and telling us in there about this variation, that there's no variations that we've got in here. Let's see here. Yeah, okay. Now, every good gift and every perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights. Now, Father of lights is the Father of the sun, the moon, the stars, all the lights that there are, the Father, the Creator, the Controller of all the heavens, with whom can be no variation, neither shadow that is cast by turning. Now, He's the Father of lights. But when you look at the lights, and you go out and you look at the sun, does the sun ever move? Do you ever look at the sun, a little while you find the sun's in a different place? Yeah. Ever look at the moon and find that the moon is in a different place? Ever look at the stars, and do the stars ever vary just the smallest amount? Now what he says is, he says God is the Father of all the lights, and He is so much more dependable than all the lights in heaven, more dependable than the sun, the moon, the stars. With Him there is no variation. There's not even the smallest little twinkle of a change with God. And there's no shadow of turning. Does the sun give off shadows? Well, you see the shadow here, and you see the shadow there, so there's some change. This section is just to show us that with God, there's absolutely no variation whatsoever. He is totally dependable. Now, let's put it all together. He starts out and he said, when you're tempted, don't say, I'm tempted of God. God is absolutely, totally dependable, never the slightest amount of variation in Him. Everything He does is totally good, and every way He goes about it is totally good. So don't ever entertain the thought that there's the slightest little thing wrong with God. Okay, then when I sin, when I get myself in trouble, whose fault is it? It comes back, there's only two of us involved. Either God made me do it, or I made me do it. That's James' point. What James is saying is, you brethren, you have to accept the responsibility as you go through this life of doing that which is right. And he said, now here's the formula. Here's how you can get in trouble, and don't ever blame it on God. And then he tells us what God also does for us. Of his own will, this is God, he brought us forth by the word of truth, that we should be a kind of first fruits of his creatures. There's a lot of interesting things in there. Of his own will, he brought us forth. Now, he's talking about as Christians. How did we get to become Christians? Let's suppose that God had created the heavens and the earth and put everything here, put Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. How long did it take man to totally separate himself from God? Long enough for Eve to go out and look at that fruit, and what did she do? Her desire, wasn't it? She had a desire because it looked good to eat. What was the other thing that she had a great, strong desire for? If I eat that, what'll happen to me? I'll get all this knowledge. I'll know everything that God knows. I'll know good and evil. Wow, I like that. See? And she and Adam sinned. Now, had God not made plans for mankind, how long would it have taken us for the whole human race to have been wiped out? See? But God made plans before he ever created the heavens and the earth. And the reason that we can be Christians today is because of God's own will. God made those plans. God set them in motion. And according to God's plans, what did you do? How did he convert you? How did he make you his child? Of his own will, he brought us forth. Now there's a little play in here, because a minute ago, what happens when my lust is conceived? I give in to my lust, and I bring forth what? Sin. Now then, of God's own will, what does God bring forth? Christians. See? And so he compares it there. He brought us forth by the word of truth. God doesn't force you to become a Christian, but he does bring you forth by the word of truth. In 2 Thessalonians 2:14, Paul there says that you're called by God. In fact, John 6:44 says, no man can come unto me except the Father that sent me draw him. So the only way you can come to God is to have the Father to draw you. Then he goes ahead in the next verse, and he explains how the Father draws you. He says, for it hath been taught in the prophets that everyone who hath heard and believes it, see, everyone who hath heard it cometh unto me. So if you hear the word, you believe the word, then you come to Jesus Christ. That's how God draws. But what does 2 Thessalonians 2:14 say? Paul there says, I called you through my gospel. See? That's how you were called, through the gospel of Jesus Christ. So that's God's part. God calls us there, and he calls us that we should be a kind, interesting word, a kind of first fruits, another one, of his creatures. Now, first of all, let's take first fruits. First fruits is a term that's used in the Old Testament, and it's set out very forcefully. That was a very spatial thing to be a first fruit. Very, very spatial. Every firstborn son was a first fruit. He's the one that was to inherit the double portion. He's the one that was to take the Father's place. He's the one that belonged to God, and they had to be redeemed from God. Very spatial. Every year when the crops came in, when the wheat came in, when the lettuce, the carrots, apples, anything that comes in, the very first fruits that you get, what do you do with them? You give them to God. They belong to God. And God says, you put me first, the first fruits belong to me, and then I will see that everything goes well with you, and you'll get the second fruits. You'll get all the rest of them. So he said, now bring the first fruits to me, and the first fruits are the assurance that there's going to be more fruits that's coming, and then God says, then that will belong to you. So the first fruits are very, very special. It's what belongs to God. Now, he says here's what God does for you. God doesn't tempt you. Remember, that's what we're talking about. God doesn't tempt you. When you're tempted to sin, don't ever say, I was tempted of God. No, 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 no. No, God has no variation, and God, by His own will, He has brought us forth by the gospel that we should be a kind of first fruits. He has made us to be His own spatial that belongs to Him, Christians that belong to Him. Now it says, a kind of first fruits. That's showing that there are different kinds of first fruits. We say, what are the kinds of first fruits? Oh, there's all kinds of first fruits. There's animals, there's humans, there's vegetation, all kinds of vegetation, first fruits, all kind of first fruits. But now we are a kind, we're a certain species, if you want to put it that way, of first fruits. Out of all the human beings on the face of the earth, we are God's spatial people. We are His first fruits. See, that's the reason He taught us all the way through the Old Testament about those first fruits. The first fruits are mine. You give me the first fruits. The first fruits belong to me. Now then, He has made us a kind of first fruits. We now belong to God. So take all the human beings on the face of the earth, and you see all kind of horrible things. Jesus comes, and Jesus says, come unto me, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Jesus calls people to come to Him, doesn't He? How many people come to Jesus? See, out of the 6 billion that are in the world today, well, whatever it is, the few who come, they're the first fruits. They're the spatial. They're the ones that belong to God. That's the kind of first fruits. It's the Christians. So the kind of first fruits of His creatures. Out of everything that He created, sun, the moon, everything, animals, men, vegetation, we are a very spatial kind of first fruits then that we've got here. Then he says, of His creatures. Okay, you see, I don't need those glasses, and I can tell I came to the end of the section. Okay, he now is just getting ready then, verse 19, then to start something else. He said, now here is what I want you to know. So here's where we're quitting tonight on here, is here at this verse. Now, keep in mind, the book is Practical Christianity. So think about what we've learned tonight. And you say, okay, what should I take away from this class? If I'm going to get what James wants me to get, what do I take away from it? Do I need to know all the definitions that were given tonight? No. What do I need to know? I need to know in my life, in my practical life, that every day of my life, I'm going to be tempted. Every day of my life, there's going to be temptations out there that Satan's going to put there, and I need to know how they work. And I need to know when I see that worm, that fish, so I'm a fish, when I see that earthworm wiggling underwater, what had that better tell me if I'm a smart fish? Earthworms don't live underwater. Take off. See, don't get that one that is in there. And so that's what we need to do. Now, if I will take James' advice and I will live by what he has taught us tonight, what kind of person will I be without going any farther? See that power that he has as he's dealing with this. Roger, blinking your eyes.
Well, I just had a question about it.
Oh, go ahead. No, I knew that you had something on your mind there.
I just was thinking the concept of lust. And here in 1:15 where it describes the lust, the sin, to death, the three steps. And the way you were using your example was you could have desire, it's starting to build, it's become strong. When you actually act on that desire, then it becomes sin and then death.
Mm-hmm.
But in Matthew 5:28, where Jesus says that when you lust upon a woman, you've already sinned.
Oh, okay. That's a good question. Jesus said, when a man lusteth after a woman, then he hath sinned, but now finish it. See, in his heart. And so this is where Jack drops the $500. I pick it up. Boy, I'd really like to have that 500. Really. Now, what am I doing in my heart now? See, in my mind. I'm lusting in my mind. But if I don't take it, I haven't sinned. And so if I see a woman and I really desire like that, but and I take off of here, I haven't sinned. It's not wrong for a man to look at a woman and say, wow, she would be something I would really like to have. See, that wouldn't be there. But what does wisdom teach you? How long do you stand around and think, boy, she's something I'd really like to have, but I'm not going to take her, but I'd really like to, but see.
That's why you're supposed to
Flee lustful lust and flee fornication. That's right. Mm-hmm. So all of those things that are in there. So that Bible is just full of good practical advice. You see, a lot of times we get to thinking it's made up of definitions because I give you lots of definitions of words and do this or that and all of that. But it's when you get up in the morning and you go to work, how does it affect your life? Okay, class dismissed.